Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. My name is Ian Alexander, and welcoming to you to the Epicor Integrates Candidate Hiring Manager and Recruiter Feedback to Optimize Hiring presentation here. We're happy to be here. I'm joined today by one of our clients, Nicole Keller, who is Global Recruiting Operations Analyst for Epicor. Nicole, welcome.
Thank you.
And Nicole, can maybe tell us a little bit about your background here and who Epicor is?
Yeah, so Epicor provides ERP solutions to kind of five main verticals: manufacturing, distribution, lumber, automotive, and retail. And I've been at Epicor for the last 3 years now, in recruiting operations for the last 2. So really working with the team to make sure we get the most out of our tools like Surveil.
Awesome. And just for everybody, my background, I'm co-founder of Surveil. Surveil is a talent feedback platform. It's what people use us for. You may also know that we are the platform, the research platform for the Candy Awards. So Talent Board does all their research and communicates the results of that research to participants using Surveil, using a cut down version of Surveil. So some of you may have some familiarity with it. But really, I want this to be kind of a free-form discussion, kind of understand what Epicor has gone through in adopting this kind of feedback-based recruiting process. But I want to set the stage first a little bit. So as we look at the agenda, we're going to kind of talk about candidate feedback, kind of what the forms of that are and how that's evolved over time and into sort of the capabilities that are there today, the capabilities that Epicor is taking advantage of. Then we're going to jump into Epicor's specific structure for their candidate feedback platform and have a good discussion here about Epicor and Nicole's experience in kind of going down this road. So with that, I want to say, ask questions in the chat all the way through. You're going to have access to these slides. So those are 2 questions that typically come up, but with that, we'll just kind of jump right in here. We're all here at a candidate experience event. And so, we're all sort of familiar with how to get feedback, traditional ways and emerging ways. So, traditionally organizations have asked new hires, how did that go? Done one-off candidate experience surveys, sort of gathering up all your past candidates and sending them out surveys to really understand what their experience has been. Many organizations look at Glassdoor reviews, get a sense of how interviews are going and how candidates are experiencing the organization as they interact with it. And of course, Candy Research, we're all here at this Candy event, another traditional way and great way of getting feedback. Now what's been emerging over the last several years is kind of comes from customer service, right? So when you deal with a company from a customer standpoint, that your experience is measured all the way through and they optimize their processes for that. And that's all automated and embedded. So same things happened within recruiting, right? So this emerging capability of automating the feedback process, you embed feedback in each of the transactions or interactions, those moments of truth in your hiring process to get feedback in real time. That feedback can then be tied back to stages in your recruiting process and interactions. The way this works is you use a feedback platform like Surveil and it integrates with your ATS. So because of that, you can tie the feedback not only to stages, but to key operational data that you already have in your ATS. You've got EEO self-identification, you have who the recruiter is, you have who the hiring manager is, what the job requisition, what the source, all that stuff can be mapped now into that feedback that you're getting. And the result then is sort of this continual, current, and actionable data that you can use to do what Epicor has been doing, which is really optimize their processes, right? So as we look at that evolution, we can look at sort of some of the things I've talked about. Asking new hires, many organizations do this. Some organizations only do this. It's better than nothing. You do get feedback in that regard, but obviously it ignores the 99.9% of candidates who didn't get hired, right? And for that reason, it's going to skew positive. I think that's pretty intuitive. When it comes to one-off surveys, they're great. You can get broader data, you can go deep, you can get, you know, information about your entire hiring process. The one drawback to that, or a few drawbacks to that, is it's point in time data, right? Typically, you're going to look back 3 months, 6 months, et cetera, gather up all your candidates and send them out a survey. I can tell you, if you've ever looked for a job and you've, applied for 50 different jobs and you get a survey 3 months later, the data you're going to get is going to be pretty sketchy just in terms of memory and interaction, unless someone's gone really deep in your process. It's labor intensive. And for all those reasons, it's hard to be consistent, right? Candy Awards, another emerging way of getting feedback there. It's the gold standard. It's the place to get benchmarks. It's an easy, inexpensive, and outsourced process. Really, I encourage everybody to participate in the candidate candies. You get recognition for the efforts that your entire team has put into making your candidate experience great. So it's great, but it suffers from some of the same limitations as one-off surveys, right? It's a backwards look. That data is not tied to specific operational data. So you can find areas that you can improve, but you really don't get much data in terms of where the problem lies, or like what region are we talking about, who is the hiring manager, et cetera, when you see those sort of negative dips in your feedback and your candy results. And so for that reason, it's difficult to get specific and take specific actions around it. So that's led the way to what I just described, which is embedded feedback. And you're always getting real-time data. It ties those responses back to your operational data, so you can get really easily drill in and find solutions or opportunities to improve. It engages candidates in a dialogue all the way through the process, right? If you're reaching out to candidates at each step of the process and asking them how you're doing, they appreciate that. They're in the mode of interacting with you. They want a job from you. So they want to interact with you any way they can. And so you're giving them that opportunity. And also from a brand standpoint, you're telling them, look, we're transparent. We're doing this. We're trying to do the best we can, and we always want to get better. And we're asking you how we can do that. So really great for the employer brand. And as we talk about how Epicor uses this, they also use the ability to gather feedback from hiring managers about recruiters and recruiters about hiring managers. So they can each look at the end of a requisition and understand, okay, what went really well with that alignment and that relationship, and where can we improve, right? So it can help align what is, we can all agree, a very kind of distributed process, which is recruiting, because you're dealing with outside vendors, you're dealing with internal stakeholders, you're dealing with different technologies. There's many blind spots to that feedback can really help you understand and optimize. So when we talk about stage-based feedback, this is typically how it breaks down. You can gather feedback at your career site. So as candidates are having a digital experience with you and interacting with your jobs and your company, you can kind of understand kind of how that experience goes and optimize that front end of the process. Same with the application process. As a candidate comes into your ATS and their status as an applicant, you can send out a little pulse survey and understand, hey, how did that application process go? What can we do better? Same with phone screens, interviews. After these personal interactions, getting some feedback at that stages, again, allows you to optimize those portions of your process. Same with offer, understanding why offers are accepted or denied, really important, especially when you want to optimize those. The ability to get feedback at each one of these phases allows you to have strong data to back up whatever you're saying. So if you have a particular job you're having a hard time converting candidates to accepted offers, maybe compensation is an issue, maybe benefits. You don't have to go to the comp department and say, hey, I think this is happening. And you have data. So really good. And then that kind of just slides into onboarding. The ability to kind of check at each stage of the onboarding process to understand what's working and what's not in that crucial first year, to really help alignment and really understand what the quality of your hire is. Feedback-based recruiting is perfect for that. tracking that quality of hire, tracking the performance of the candidate through onboarding in the first year, et cetera. And then as we talked about, that alignment between recruiting and hiring managers, which is so important. So that's kind of the broad set of the stages and kind of interactions you can do, but you can really set it any way that you want in terms of those moments of truth in your hiring process, going narrow or going broad. This is what Epicor is doing, so we're gathering feedback at the career site to understand that experience, the recruiter screen on the phone, interview process. Epicor is looking at declined offers, and then very strongly looking at hiring manager recruiter interactions and recruiter hiring manager interactions. That look pretty familiar there, Nicole?
Yep, that's right.
Yeah. And so one of the other things that you're doing along the way there is measuring net promoter score at each stage, right, Nicole?
Mm-hmm.
And the ability that gives you is then to really see kind of key performance indicator. What's our candidate net promoter score? We want that to be high. We want candidates satisfied, but also to see how that varies through each stage, right? So that's a question you can ask at each stage, and you guys are doing that, right, Nicole?
Yeah, we are. It's valuable.
Yeah. So there's just sort of the ins and outs of kind of the structure, but that kind of leads us into the discussion. Nicole, you talked about the fact that you kind of came you've kind of came up through Epicor in the recruiting department, kind of made a move over into operations a couple of years ago. And that was kind of a new function within Epicor, correct?
Yeah, it was a newly started role. It had never been done before prior to me entering the role.
And kind of what was kind of talk me through what was the impetus for kind of establishing that role, and kind of what were you guys looking to accomplish with that? Because that's something I see with a lot of organizations, either recently or currently kind of moving to an operational function within recruiting.
Right. So I think it kind of started in the sense that, my manager, the VP of Global Talent, and the team were hiring at a faster pace than ever. And prior to our COVID year, we were close to 1,000 hires a year. So, things were moving quickly, and the recruiters are focused on recruiting, and even our recruiting managers were focused on recruiting, but we really needed someone to come in and kind of operationalize things and focus on our processes and look for areas of improvements and really be that strategy driver. We also have a lot of tools that we use for the recruiting process. So really having someone there to make sure that we're getting the most out of those tools and we're getting ROI. So I think that's where the need was determined, and then that's where I came in.
Right, and my understanding is this need to kind of get candidate feedback. That was kind of one of the first things you all did, correct?
It was actually a project that I started researching before I even came into the role. That was kind of like my manager was kind of testing the waters and wanted to get a feel for my working style. So that's actually when I started researching candidate feedback platforms. And so as soon as I joined, that was the first thing that we implemented.
And what's kind of what was the drive behind that? What was it that you guys wanted to know, or kind of the big picture of going down that road?
Yeah, so kind of like you touched on, I mean, previously we were only really collecting feedback about our onboarding experience at like a 10, 45, 90-day mark. So at that point, candidates or then employees aren't thinking as much about that hiring process. They're thinking more about their onboarding experience. So that was definitely a bit of a blind spot for us. And then also, like you touched on, we were looking to Glassdoor. But ideally, if something goes wrong, you want to kind of catch it before then and give candidates the opportunity to provide feedback about the hiring process and get that continuous feedback loop. And then also, to your point, understand where things are going wrong if they are going wrong.
Right. And that's a really interesting point that you gave, because I see that a lot is, another real benefit of this approach is that it's kind of a relief valve for issues that might happen in your hiring process.
Right.
So candidates can come to you and you're already preemptively asking, how did that go? So
Yeah,
you're really intercepting maybe some negative reviews that might come out on social media or Glassdoor beforehand. I see that a lot. And it's one of
yeah,
those sort of hidden benefits of kind of going down this road, and there's a lot of those. Um,
exactly.
and 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 we talk about candidate satisfaction. You know, using this approach is as much about candidate satisfaction as it is about operational excellence, right? How important in that mix do you look at this process as, in terms of, are you out there trying to make candidates happy, or are you out there trying to improve your processes? How would you rank those two goals within your organization, or the importance? I know they're really heavily intertwined, I imagine.
Yeah, I think they really do have to go hand in hand. The cool thing about the way that we went about it is we used that candidate feedback to improve our processes. So that candidate feedback told us where we needed to improve, and then we used that, to create initiatives and areas that we wanted to focus on. So I do really think those need to go hand in hand. But prior to implementing Surveil, we were making changes. Like, for example, when a candidate gets rejected, we provide a service that helps them in their job search for the next 6 months, which is a really cool feature, but we weren't getting any feedback about that. Do candidates appreciate that we have this service? So, we were making process changes before implementing Surveil, but we never had visibility to what candidates think about those kind of features.
Yeah. Did you get that feedback, and how was that?
We did. People are really thankful for that feature specifically. And we have 7 different rejection letter templates that each indicate the reason for rejection. Candidates are really appreciative of that as well, because I think that is a little bit rare. So we definitely got valuable feedback as soon as we implemented.
And so, just for level setting here, how long have you guys been, or you all been using this process?
So the process of the rejection, or the process of
No, sorry,
Surveil?
gathering feedback and optimizing your operations with it.
Yeah, so since October of last year, that's when we implemented.
Great. And so October, that's year and a half almost.
Yeah.
So how are the candidates experiencing that? Are you experiencing, do you get sort of feedback from the candidates as to whether they like this, participating and giving feedback? Is there things like survey fatigue, that kind of stuff? You have any sort of input about that?
Yeah, so we haven't experienced anything that indicates survey fatigue. One, based on your slide that's up right now, one spot that we skip is the accepted offer, to kind of account for that survey fatigue. And we also find that when a candidate accepts an offer, they tend to just be so happy that they got the role that they just tend to talk about that. And so we did skip that stage. We haven't had any indication of survey fatigue, but the information that we've gotten since implementing has been so valuable. And as I mentioned, we implemented in October. We let it run for 6 months to really get, all of the enough feedback to where we could do something with it. And then right around that time, COVID hit. So we were able to really slow down as a team. There was a little bit of a hiring slowdown, and that's when we kind of devised initiatives based on the feedback that we had been collecting, that we were going to focus on for the next couple of months. And so some things that came of that were, there could be delays in the process, and that causes a poor candidate experience. So how can we be really transparent early on about what the process looks like? So we created a new welcome email when a candidate applies, kind of outlining the process. Here's what to expect. If there's delays, this is where they might occur, things like that. We realized that there was a little bit of misalignment between the recruiter and the hiring manager early on, and that was causing also delays throughout the process. So we revised our calibration form between the recruiter and the hiring manager to make sure that they're really getting aligned early on. We also found that sometimes hiring managers don't have all the information they need about our recruiting process. So we created an internal SharePoint site for kind of all information that a hiring manager could need about the recruiting process. And then we also discovered that sometimes the recruiters don't have all of the answers to candidates' questions. So sometimes a candidate wants to know, what does a week or two in the life look like in this role? And we realized through a couple different surveys that the recruiter doesn't always have the answer to that question. So for about our top 15 or so roles that we hire for the most, we created what's called a role, we call it a role insights form. It gives you all the information you could need about a role and what a week in the life looks like, who are they working with the most, things like that. So there were a lot of really cool initiatives that came out of the feedback that we collected.
Yeah, that's interesting because a lot of times, you know, you kind of make assumptions about where certain information is communicated to a candidate, right?
Right.
And that information may live in recruiting, and that knowledge may live in recruiting, but then sort of in some way in your process, you discovered, well, it really is needed in this step of the process, either
Exactly.
exclusively or in addition to. We need to arm that. I think that's fascinating, and that typically kind of the only the only insights you can get from really getting that feedback at each stage and in real time. You're one of the organizations, and most of our clients, or many of our clients, implement this to some fashion or the other, which is this sort of recruiter feedback on hiring managers and hiring manager feedback about recruiters. Can you kind of talk about how you've implemented that, sort of what the structure of that is, how that works, and then what you do with that information?
Yeah, so this specific area, we don't actually send the hiring manager feedback that the recruiter provides, but we do send the recruiter feedback that the hiring manager provides. And I think having both sides is helpful because, you know, there are two sides to every story, and one, you know, may feel like something fell on the recruiter, but in actuality, you know, the hiring manager was causing delays in some way, or, you know, whatever it may be. So we really wanted to have both sides to every story. And I think that hiring manager and recruiter relationship is so vital to, you know, having a successful process throughout the whole candidate experience. And it's the first most important step. So, you know, that's why we focused on the calibration between the two. We also revised the feedback form that the hiring manager provides on candidates so that, you know, we can really get more detailed information about the candidates. If they feel like, you know, the recruiter is not providing candidates that they see fit, we'd like to know that. So I think that relationship right there is so key, and having, you know, visibility to both sides has been really, really helpful for us.
Yeah, and to clarify, you're saying that you're gathering feedback on both, but to be clear, you were saying that you're only sharing that feedback in one way, right? So you're still gathering it from both constituencies, but you're sort of limiting how it's shared.
Yeah, I think, you know, the recruiter piece of things is what's most important. If something is maybe not going right with a hiring manager, we'd like to know that. And, you know, if there are conversations that need to be had, then there will, but it's more just for visibility for us. And like I mentioned, that recruiter piece is what we find most valuable. And we send these surveys out as soon as a rec closes. So as soon as a position is filled, we like to hear what went well and what maybe didn't go so well.
Right. And if I recall, do you use that data in sort of in a performance management sense for recruiters, whether it's incentives or you know, direct, you know, reviews kind of thing?
Yeah, so we do quarterly recruiter performance, and their overall surveil score, which is mostly determined as a combination of all of these things, but specifically with a focus obviously on the recruiter phone screen, and then taking hiring manager feedback into account as well. So recruiters are being assessed quarterly on, you know, their performance in terms of candidate experience. And I think it's a huge driver for them to perform well and create the most positive candidate experience possible, because they are being measured on it.
Right. And it's mostly directly in terms of their interactions with candidates and with a flavor of hiring manager feedback in there. Okay.
Exactly.
I'm curious. Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, we created functional goals around our recruiter phone screen percentage, like our score, and then our hiring manager percentage. So within our function, those are our goals to hit a certain number or above. So it's definitely, top of mind with everything that we do.
Yeah, and I'll say, to those watching this, um, you know, it's the difference between doing everything you can to get great candidate experience, because we all know what the benefits of that are. They flow through to your hiring efficiency and effectiveness. But what you're seeing here is operationalizing that, right? It's one thing to say we want to do everything we can to make candidates successful and happy and satisfied, but until you sort of operationalize that, you're kind of shooting in the dark there, and you have no
Exactly.
idea how well you're doing. So, and that's kind of the underpinning of this entire sort of little case study here with Epicor. And you guys have done a great job with it. I'm curious, having put this into place, were there any sort of surprises? Because we talk a lot about thinking versus knowing, right? Because we all we have experience in our roles, we have a gut feel about what's happening out there. Did you guys run across any sort of surprises that you weren't expecting?
So I guess kind of that piece that I touched on with, our recruiters maybe not having all of the information that they should about the role, that was a bit surprising to us. We just wouldn't have known that otherwise. And so I think that was really valuable to know. And, having these forms for all of our top 15 roles to give them all of the information they could need about a role has added, has contributed to that gap, filling that gap. And I think one surprising thing too is that, oftentimes we are providing such a great candidate experience for people. And we got so much positive feedback throughout this process. And, you hope that that's what you're creating for candidates, but it's also really great to see that, and then to be able to communicate that to the recruiters and let them know, you made a really positive experience for this candidate when hiring for this role, and you should be proud of that. So that was definitely, a pleasant surprise for us to see how often we're impacting candidates in a positive way.
Yeah. So the flip side of the sort of measuring your performance is you also get to see when that flows through to a great experience, and that's motivating. So kind of, you've gone through a year and a half of this. What is Epicor focusing on now? You've kind of got a great structure. You've been working with it for a while, seeing the benefits of that. What's sort of next in Epicor recruiting with regard to feedback and candidate experience?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, when we really cracked down on some of these initiatives based on the data that we collected through Surveil, this was at a time when kind of COVID first hit and things were moving maybe a bit slower than usual. We had some roles kind of on hold. And so now, obviously, we're moving full speed ahead, hiring, faster than ever. And I think it's really just maintaining all of those things that we focused on. When you're moving at 100 miles an hour, it's a lot easier to maybe drop the ball on those things. So making sure that we're still focusing with hiring, in a quality way, and, continuing to keep in mind the candidate experience. We also just hired a new dedicated sourcing team. So I'm curious to see, how that impacts things. If it does, what kind of feedback we may see come through in terms of, this small change in our process. And, maybe this causes less delays because we have a dedicated sourcer and the recruiter isn't focused on sourcing as much. So I'd like to see the impact of that.
And that's the benefit of moving on something like this, and having this operationalized, is when you make changes, whether that's a new video interviewing platform maybe that you're trying out, or a new function, you've got a baseline now. You've got a year and a half of, okay, we know how this works now. Now that
Exactly.
we move one of the pieces, now we can see what the effect is, and also optimize that as you run into, issues with whether it's alignment or whether it's candidate experience. You can kind of see those in real time as it's happening, and really nice. That's awesome. I guess to end up, and I would tell people that you're welcome to enter any questions that you have into chat, and we'll answer those questions. And I'm also going to give you some contact information to send questions after the fact. But now that you've kind of done this, and you've put this into place and you've got it running smoothly and made some great changes and are achieving the benefits. What kind of advice would you give to an organization who's maybe considering moving down this road, in terms of questions to ask, what, things you've kind of learned that maybe you didn't know before you started the process, or things to keep in mind if you have that?
Yeah, I mean, my advice would be to do it. I can't believe that, we went as long as we did without having this type of feedback and without understanding, what we're doing well and what we're maybe not doing so well. We did get responses from candidates every once in a while proactively, but we just had major blind spots to kind of the transparency on how our process was going. So I can't imagine going back. And I guess advice I would give is to, if you do decide to implement Surveil or some sort of feedback platform, following this process of collecting all of that feedback, giving some time to let that feedback come through, and then really like looking at that feedback as a team and understanding, okay, what's going well, what do we need to focus on, create some initiatives to focus on, based on that data, and then see the impact. So we, focused on all of those things, and we saw that our candidate satisfaction with the recruiter went up by 6%. And our candidate satisfaction with the hiring manager interviews went up by 4%. Yeah, it sounds small, but it's really huge percentages, and it takes a lot to do. And then that hiring manager satisfaction with our recruiting team went up by 16%. So seeing that impact is just like so valuable that I can't imagine doing it any other way.
Well, that's great. I want to thank you for joining us. I want to thank everybody for joining us in the session. If you've got any questions, you can send them to the address that you see, the email address. And again, we can answer questions through the chat as well. Great. Well, thanks everybody for joining us, and have a great day.
Thank you.